All right, we might as well get started. There's not a lot of other folks coming in right now. So welcome to the STIR meeting at IETF 102. If this happens to be one of the first meetings you've been at this week, please be aware that we are operating under Notewell. If you don't know what Notewell is, there are links on this slide that will take you to read about it. You need to know about it before you participate, before you contribute in this session. I'm trying the Chromebook for the first time. I have no idea what I'm doing, so forgive me as we stumble along. Here is our intended agenda, open for bashing. We'll have a quick report on status of documents that are in flight, then spend some time talking about divert and out of band, and then possibly talk about the errata we have filed on a couple of RFCs, whether and what we should do about them, and the call flows draft and P-charge info. This is everybody's. I'm here not seeing anybody rush to the mic to bash that agenda, so we'll start off with where we are. I think that the status of the documents in flight is normal and expected. We have some things at the beginning of the progress that have been sent to the ISG. They're percolating up. We have some things that are at the very end of the process with the RFC editor that have been working their way through the last things that needed to actually happen to get IANA to put stuff in some registries. But we have no exceptions, and to my knowledge, nothing at this point is actually stuck. Does anybody think otherwise? Okay. So, do we have anything that we need to actually talk about with respect to Shaken? Mary, Chris, is Chris here? Don't see Chris, so.
Well, I mean, the document went through working group last call and we got 0 comments. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if the chairs are comfortable with progressing a document that has no comments, or we think it's done, right? It's, you know, and it pretty much describes what we have in the ADIS document. Okay.
So I gave a comment to Chris, who's not here, so I guess I'll speak to it. John Peterson, sorry. I'm sure he'll be here in a sec, which just is because we've talked a lot, especially in connection with some of the divert stuff, about the size of passports. I kind of wonder why Shaken doesn't have a compact form. Like, it's actually perfectly feasible to do it, especially because I understand that in that shadowy world they call 3GPP, there are shadow P headers for. There are, I know. Which, you know, would be great, by the way, if the IETF knew about those shadow P headers that are over there in 3GPP. But given that those exist, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do a compact form for Shaken.
I'm not in 100% agreement. Okay. Right. Okay. Because, I mean, we've got the document out. People are already starting, you know, to implement and such. So maybe it's something to look at later, right? If these things really do get that big that it's causing people grief. And I agree with your point about the P headers. They should bring that stuff here. They've got another thing. They've got this VERSTAT thing that's not here either. Yeah, I know. That's what I talked about that in the 3GPP meeting. So we need to, someone can write it up and bring it, right?
I would just say it seems like a pretty easy thing to add, and you don't need to actually use it in ADIS if you don't want to, right? You can just use exclusively full form and say maybe later if you want compact form, you can use it. But it's like pretty easy to just kind of specify how you do it. I mean, all it is just saying, hey, if you're going to want to do this in compact form, point to those shadow headers and it's done, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. So those P headers are not part of any of our documents right now. They exist in terms of a standard in PowerPoint slides. Literally, that's the degree of documentation right now. So, I mean, we can push for that and then get that standardized. I mean, but I don't want it to hold up this document.
It sounds like you have nothing to reference at this point.
Correct. There, we do not exactly there unless, yeah, we don't reference PowerPoint. So yeah.
Right, but putting the capability inside Shaken to have the compact form, even though we don't currently have things that we would point to.
I need to talk to Chris about that because there was another reason why he didn't want to do it,
Yeah, well,
as I'm recalling. So.
Yeah, if he shows up,
Okay.
we'll come back to
Well,
this.
okay.
So otherwise, if he doesn't end up making it, then we'll take this one to the list before we actually push the document a little bit further up.
Actually, John, could you make your comment on the list? Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and step forward into the discussion of divert and out of band, and we'll come back to Shaken if we have the right people in the room later. So, John, if you want to start working your way up.
So far. Hi. So I have very, very little to say today. Next slide, please.
I can give you the thing.
You got a clicky thing. These things are awesome.
Trying to make it
Yeah, you hit the
actually
thing
work.
that looks like the little crosshairs there.
Right here.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. Okay. For those who have not been paying such rapt attention to this as a few of us have, this is the divert draft. This is probably the most commonly asked for feature beyond the core features of SIP. How do we handle retargeting cases where you're trying to get to one destination and it turns out that some intermediary retargets it? So the original passport says the destination is one thing and the request URI where it lands is another thing. And if you're that entity at the verification service side, you say, was this actually for me? Or is somebody just cut and pasting a random thing that was for somebody else entirely and using that to impersonate what appears to be the source in it? And we thought this is an easy one to fix, right? We'll just create this thing that will put it in a new field, we call it div, and we'll just put this in a passport that lets you match up what the original destination was with the new destination, include that as well as the original. So is this different from history info and from the long non-standardized diversion header, which we nonetheless have an informational RFC for? It is for a couple reasons. One, of course, it's secure. It has the signatures of STIR associated with it. But moreover, because of the canonicalization features of STIR, it actually only captures certain categories of retargeting. It's very narrow compared to the way that something that wants to do, say service logic works. So in other words, if all the changes about the URI is this is telephone number at AT&T turns into telephone number at Verizon, thanks to the canonicalization procedures, that isn't even a different passport for STIR. So we didn't even capture that stuff. That's the big idea here. Been working on this for a while. Addis has been kicking the tires on this hard. What we've got in it that's actually new, we actually talked about this like a great deal, and this is connected with discussions that have been ongoing with Addis. Dave Hancock, who's been working this quite a bit, has been going through use cases endlessly to try to figure this out. So far with this nesting issue, this question of whether or not you should be able to literally embed within one passport another passport so that you know which one got diverted. So in case you get like 50 of them, right, in different identity headers, you know, like which one connects to like which one because of some elaborate service logic path this went through. It's kind of clear to you like kind of the order in which these things got put together, in which passports rely on other passports, rather than just kind of getting a bucket and you got to like sort through. Does this one match with this one? We ended up with a should, a recommendation that nesting seemed to work. There are some known corner cases related to redirection. And redirection is already kind of a corner case for STIR because it isn't actually broken. There's no security feature that can be triggered by this 302 case. We talked a lot about this last time in London. But nonetheless, we decided that it probably, for the kinds of use cases we're likely to encounter, would be okay to do nesting for in-band. Eric actually made a comment about this on the list like an hour ago. I don't know if you want to talk about it. This is probably a good place to because we've got this up here. I guess what I'd say, so Eric's comment was effectively, since OOB was one of the motivations for this, and it's true it was. The other one was just, I mean, if you end up with a SIP message with like 50 identity headers in it, so it went through exactly the tortuous service logic you're describing, you're then left as a verification service with the task of figuring out how they relate. History info can help with that. Now, if you're using history info, as Mary shows in her draft, the HI that's in that will let you be able to sequence them. But in the absence of that, it's actually kind of tricky. And especially if you've got like any kind of recursion or things like that are built into this, is if you're doing like dips through forwarding, that can get kind of hairy. So, I mean, and by the way, I mean, I think that the DOS thing, unfortunately, works for either nesting or not, right? You still end up with this massive SIP request with like 50 different passports in it. And the question of whether they're nestled or not doesn't really matter. The zip might help. I'll give you that. If you really want to save bits, if you've got 50 of these things, you might be, but it's base64 encoded already too. So, I mean, you know, these things have a lot of entropy in them, and like zipping them is, you know, it may help, it's not gonna help too much.
Yeah, the thing is, you know, it's one thing to have the, pardon? Who am I, Eric? I'm Eric. I am Eric Berger. State your name. Let's go like someone is doing a denial of service thing. A 50 kilobyte SIP message where it's, you know, 50,000 byte long lines will still probably be properly digested and kicked out at a certain point. When you have a header that's 50 kilobytes long, that will probably break things. I could go either way in all things. I was actually saying if the driver for this is out of band, that's not compelling to me, but that's just to me. It may be compelling to a bunch of people, in which case do it. And the reason I say do it is if you say nesting is should, then no one's going to do it. So either it is the way it's done or it's not the way it's done. Pick one.
Yeah, we had this last time. So we've had this discussion the past couple times about the right way to do it. And we're like, should we do only nesting for out of band, but we'll do non-nested for in band? And like, so we've kind of gone back and forth. I think what we ended up with though last time, and I mean, we took the sense of the room a couple times on this, you know, it's pretty much, let's leave it as an option. There are cases where it might not make sense though, right? And I think some of exactly these like history info-ish cases might turn out to be the ones where it doesn't make sense. And so because of that, we didn't want to make it a must. We wanted to say there are some things you could be doing in addition to dev that might help you sort this out.
So if most people, especially since the thing we're doing this for is going to drive people to use history info, then
that's the problem.
you know, saying, well, if you're doing out of band, you'll bundle it all together.
So that
You know, we're going to
push
have
back on
years of
that.
people doing it one way, and then they're probably not going to start doing it another.
The reason we're doing this is to beat impersonation attacks. History info doesn't do that. History info is a service logic tracker, right?
Right.
And it's not our job, it's not in our threat model to preserve service logic. It's in our threat model to prevent people from impersonating things. And so when we say we're not here to do that, it's kind of extra credit, I think, to like bind this to. There are plenty of things we're going to bind this to that are extra credits. That's not necessarily bad, but it's not why we're doing this.
Mary Barnes. So I will posit that we did history info to be generic. The motivation originally was service logic, but I'm positing, and we're, you know, working through this in Shaken, that you're going to do more work to try and capture that information than if you just did history info. You're going to be ending up putting some of that information that you would have with history info into your.
Well, that's why we have just an HI, like history index built into Passport.
Correct.
So we don't
That's
have
what I'm
to do that.
saying. That's what I'm saying. It makes those scenarios easier if you have the history.
Yeah,
info,
yeah.
is all what I'm saying. And if
Yeah.
you try and work around those cases another way, some of the things you're going to do and information you might want to capture is going to be what you'd have in history info if you get it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic. I think there's still a set of ordinary operations use cases that are 99.9% of the way more, that all calls work.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
where-
I'm not debating
right,
that, but we've got.
You're never going to need these things you're describing. And
Correct.
So where you'll never see more than one way of nesting in, you know, again, that's 99.9% of the cases, right?
Right, but there you get some enterprise cases and stuff, and that's what we're teasing through and shaking, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some of how that enterprise case discussion has gone. That's a
Right.
different discussion about the security properties carriers are willing to allow.
Well, no, it's
enterprises to
both.
have.
It's both issues. It's
And-
the diversion stuff that,
You know, I think that's a profile that is specific to the way that Shaken treats endpoints, treats user agents, that I wouldn't build generically into Stir.
well, I
You
think,
know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about, but I still think that doing it generically is a better thing. But especially given other discussions we've had about the value of doing generic things. But anyways, right?
And just the other thing is, when I said you can zip up the different things, it's not because I'm saying, oh, you can compress it, because hopefully the signatures are not going to compress, because if they
Yeah.
can, it says we failed on our choice of
I
algorithm.
believe so, yeah.
But it's the concept of if you're worried about, oh, I want to put a thing into this CPS that I can, pull back a thing. That's kind of independent of this mechanism.
I mean, again, it's not the first time we're on this merry-go-round. We
Right.
had this discussion of whether we should just only do nesting for the CPS case, but then a lot of people here were like, well, actually, for the 99.9% redirection cases where there's a single retargeting, actually nesting makes more sense. And it's these Krister-like cases where, but the problem is then like you're actually forking it, you know, like in parallel, like 5 different places, and you need to make like 5 different passports that like are each, you know, and the server-side combination of this works a lot better if you could do nesting for those than if you actually have them all be separate. And so, and it was really the 302 thing that put us over the line on this, right? It was the fact that we wanted, and this is all an extra credit land as far as I'm concerned. We wanted to be able to, where you historically used a version when a 302 came back to a UAC, to be able to sign something, right? Have something signed that you would have gotten then from the redirection server that would accompany the new invite that would go out with the new targets that back to this, that led to a lot of the complexity. It led us to say, maybe we do need nesting for this actually, for the in-band cases.
Right, and so I would offer
But there's only
lead with that, and oh, by the way, this out of band thing could happen too.
If it's a
As opposed to,
spec-and-ship
oh, we got to
question.
do this for out of band and.
Yeah, yeah. If it's spec-and-ship question, I can fix that.
And then I would offer must.
Yeah, there were people who argued that there are cases where they wanted to do it with separate identity headers, and I mean,
Was that on the list?
no, it was
That
in
was
the
in the
room,
room.
and like
Then it didn't
we have
exist.
to go. Yeah. We have to go back to the. It didn't. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's also that we, like you pointed out, we have some things in there that say we'd like some operational experience with this. We'd like to kick the tires a bit. I'd rather not say you must not do this with individual identity headers. I'd rather say you should do it this way. And if people want to profile that out once they discover that it doesn't work for some particular deployment environment, I don't want them to be out of compliance with us, right?
Although I'd love to do the Rich Shockey infinite employment program, if we can avoid saying we're going to, or we say we're throwing stuff out there and hope something sticks, which means it is experimental. But to say, well, we'll do something that's standard, which we know.
They get this
we're gonna
box
change our
yesterday
mind.
called RC++. We talked about what it is for things to be a standard, a draft standard, a proposed standard.
Mhm.
I think that there is enough MOTS around this that there's going to be some implementation. We'll be able to see what happened from it. I think it meets the bar for PS as I understand it in the way that we do things. And
Well, obviously, we'll leave that to our chairs and our AD.
I'd like to give it a whack anyway. See how it goes. Just wondering if like Chris is texting me that he's in the hospital or something. We also, and this is actually something Krister and others raised on here and I think on the list, we made opt independent of div. So opt is the thing that lets you do the nesting. It's a parameter that actually just contains an embedded passport. It occurred to people there could be some future extension that would also want to be able to use nesting of passports for reasons other than div. And so we actually broke that out a bit in the description in there to make it clear that you could do that and make it, this wasn't just like a sub-element of div that we were describing. That's it. Next, oh, one more thing. Yeah, next slide.
You got the button.
Oh, geez. I got this thing. I'm like talking. I don't know what this thing is. I'm like
He's gonna
holding it.
keep it.
It's just my phone. It's my mic. One thing that did occur to me actually was a nesting optimization I hadn't thought of. And this actually came from some of the discussions we had about this last time that as I was writing this up, I hadn't thought of. That is at least wanted to float. This text is now in there. It's soft text right now. We could cut it out. But this notion that in this case, we receive a 302 with multiple contact headers, you could, of course, just create a single passport. It's going to be used in every invite you send out that has a dest list that contains the target list that is in the contact header fields of the 302 response. And then as a consequence of that, you don't have to sign like, 15 new passports. It's actually 15 different contacts that come back in the 302. The pro of that is that there's only like one, nested passport that you include in all the targets. The con is, of course, that it reveals the target list to every destination. And so if you don't want everybody who receives this to know what all the contacts lists were, then that's bad. So, I mean, I put this in as a, hey, in some environments, it might make sense to do this. But like, I would probably leave it in with that just so we don't rule this out, just in case somebody thinks it's useful in some environments, it might be. There are a lot of cases, for example, where like a 302 comes back from a service that's just kind of forking out to your 4 devices, right? And like it does, since you control all 4 of those devices, you're not revealing anything to any one of them to show them what the total destination list was. In fact, shows you all of the devices you control that ended up being run by this particular invite. So, I mean, it's not always a bad thing to reveal the target list in that way. It's a good idea. It hadn't occurred to me before, but there may be other pros and cons of these that I haven't thought of. I put some things in there. If people want it in or out, let me know. And anybody have any thoughts on that off the top of their head? It seemed like it might be useful.
Does anyone object to it staying in the document?
Mary Barnes, I don't think it's a good idea. So.
You need to say a little more than that.
Well, because you are revealing information, and you also have to consider when you're routing some of these things, you're actually putting privacy headers in there and that sort of thing as well. So what do you do with the ones that have that in there, right?
Well, I
You'd have to
just
print.
gave you a use case example where it doesn't matter because all of the targets are things that, again, it's your server. In other words, when you're redirecting, right, you're deciding to reveal the contact list and to give the passport back, remember? The person who does the redirecting is the one who generates the passport.
Oh, yeah.
And so
yeah.
they get to choose whether or not they think it's okay to
That's
share
fine.
this
Okay, that's
with each
fine.
individual.
We just won't do it in shaken. That's okay.
Okay. Thank you, master of shaken, controller of all that is shaken. Next slide.
Push the button.
I'm not going to learn this. I'm not going to learn. I got it. I'll attach to my head this time. This is pretty close. I think Addis has kicked the tires on div pretty hard at this point. I think we understand what it does and doesn't do. I would be comfortable shipping roughly what the mechanism is at this point. Mary's also looking a bit at some of the stuff in terms of the HI interaction. It certainly needs editorial review. I don't think anybody's gone through like and redlined this and said if the sentences make sense or something. But yeah, you got a red line review. Thank you. Editorial reviews. That's very useful. But I'm serious.
Actually, can we get some other people to volunteer to do reviews? Eric obviously
Sean.
did one. Sean and
Mary will
Mary.
check it out. Fantastic.
Okay.
Chris, reread it, Chris, make sure because you're
All right.
close. Last
So
close
can the
read was
minute
useful.
taker put those 4 names in the minutes, please? Eric.
Who already did one. So Eric is done. He does not need to be
He's just
smacked
going.
around for this. But I'd say with that, I mean, I'd be comfortable as calling this at this point. I think it's pretty well understood what this does and doesn't do, and a lot of people seem to think we need one. Okay.
Eric again. Russ, I mean, I'll start the thing that just says must or should on the list.
Please do.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
Okay. And if nobody responds, then it should sounds great. If a bunch of people say it should be should, then should sounds great.
Why do some people say it may be must?
It may
Capital may,
Yes.
little b must.
Yeah.
be. Amber is.
I hear an April Fool's RFC descending from the heavens upon us all. Oob. Oh, are you coming for this, Richard? For diverting?
Rich Shockey, just an editorial reminder that it is Addis and the SIP Forum Joint Task Force that kicked the tires on this. Just a little bit here.
Noted. The SIP forum, that is www.sipforum.org. Membership costs how much now?
12,500.
Just 12,500.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
The other part is, just out of curiosity, because people's attitudes might have changed since the last time everyone met, why don't you just ask everybody to raise their hands, must versus should, so we could just see what people think at this particular point in time?
If the chairs would like to take a hum on, well, what are you saying, must versus should for what exactly? For using nesting in band? Okay, so to be clear, that would mean that we are not allowed to have an identity header with a div in it unless it has a nested passport in it. That is forbidden by the spec now, is what must means.
That's what must would mean.
If the chairs would like to do that, feel free.
Sure, as long as you step away from the microphone when we do that.
I will not be humming either way, actually. I'll stand over here. But,
Okay, so the hum is you prefer that it be must, you prefer it to be should, or you don't care. All right. You prefer it to be must? You prefer it to be should? You don't care. Mhm. I heard slightly louder for must.
Send it to the list.
Well, that's what I'm just, but usually these discussions start with what you heard in the room. Okay?
yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think I guess I'll have to write something to the list that kind of talks about what I think the trade-offs are of this and what it means to make that decision. But okay, next slide is me. I can do the next slide myself. I have even less to say about this document. This is the thing where we're trying to figure out a way to do STIR without actually sending the passports in band. All kinds of reasons why you might want to do this. It might be that there's a gateway at the thing. You see that's an authentication service there that's getting dropped to the PSTN, and it's going to get picked up by another gateway on the other side. These could be endpoints. There could be all kinds of these weird use cases. Pretty much this is our story, though, about how to do SIP and how to make STIR work when it's not SIP end-to-end. And there are just a lot of cases where it's not SIP end-to-end. I hear this a lot when I talk to people out in the world. This is a great idea. If it doesn't work for cases that are not SIP end-to-end, you are not actually solving the problem. So I've been trying to solve this problem. So what's new? What have I done to solve this problem recently? Pretty much nothing, actually. That's a very cosmetic update. I tried to make it clear. I mocked up a REST example last time that was just a guide for future work that somebody could pick that up if they felt like it. I removed a couple of TBDs, but I'm gonna be honest, my plan here is to say, if you look at the title of this document, it has said it is an architecture and framework for doing out-of-band. And I'm content to leave it at that for the moment, to just treat this as a framework architecture document. And if there's interest, we'll do some kind of protocol specifications for it at a later time. There's enough here to do some implementation based on it if people felt like it. But that's it. My plan now is to say we have a charter item to explore out-of-band. This is what an architecture and framework would look like. I think it's articulated enough. We kind of get what the use cases are. We get what the basic idea is of how you do this. And if there's sufficient implementation interest to take this further, we'll take it further. But otherwise, we'll consider this to kind of satisfy the obligation in the charter. Would anyone like to convince me that instead we should do a protocol for this here? Yeah, I don't see anybody leaping up to a microphone, oddly enough.
Is anyone working on or know of anyone that's working on an out-of-band implementation already? So
Now, it doesn't do exactly this in this document, but yes. Let me ask this. Does anybody think it's important to solve a case, for this case, that is not SIP end-to-end? I see a couple hands up. I see a couple people shaking their hands like this a bit. I see Rich Shockey coming up.
This is Rich Hockey. Yes, it is possible at some future date. And I think the plan that you've outlined, which is to advance this to essentially an architectural document, is perfectly reasonable and prudent until such time as we can find one carrier on the face of planet Earth that would actually like to do this.
Do they have to be a carrier?
No.
Okay.
But I have heard personally absolutely no one that's interested in this. However, times change, attitudes change, but certainly taking this to last call, I certainly think it's a good idea.
I'll buy it. I think I'm here to declare victory, man. I've got this huge mission accomplished banner behind me. I'm like, dude.
That's where this is at.
Yeah, exactly.
Anybody want to run up to the mic and say we need to go ahead and specify protocol right now?
I mean, so there's already like a little mock-up, right, of like what it would be like to do this with REST in there. It's not something you could actually implement to, right? It's just a mock-up.
Right.
It's there just to show what you might do to do something like this.
So it's Eric. Do we run a risk that people will say, oh, we've solved out of band, therefore no one needs to work on a solution? by saying we're done and publishing?
I think if it's clear that it's published as an overview in an architecture and not as a concrete proposed protocol, then I don't think we have a problem.
And if anyone later says, oh, we've got a different solution that doesn't follow this architecture, we can't do it because we published an RFC, do I get to shoot them in the head?
I mean, I don't believe that RFC.
No?
I don't believe that publishing BGP made it so when someone came along with ISIS, it meant that they couldn't get an RFC.
Okay.
So if that was your question.
No harm.
Okay. I think that's all I got. Chris, you're here. Do you want to talk at all about Shaken? And I raised the demon question of whether Shaken should have a compact form. That's the only reason why but you weren't here yet. And I was like, it's okay.
Yeah, I think I haven't received any comments on, I think we talked about, or we actually went through working group last call on the list, so.
Yeah, so we have this late comment that you might consider putting in
What was the comment? I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
compact form.
Oh, compact form, yeah.
Yeah, I just brought up that because basically the chair said there have been no last call comments, and so should we just advance this? And so I did say to you privately,
Yes.
shouldn't there be a compact form in this? And I thought at least we should have the discussion.
Sure. Do you want to have the discussion?
Well, I already had some of it. I said that if you care about saving bytes, and because the shadow
Yes.
P headers for origin and so on exist over in 3GPP, I mean, surely those are what you would then use, to point to from the compact form of Shaken.
No.
Well,
No, actually we don't. Those P headers, what they do is actually we build the passport from those P headers. Those P headers don't leave the service provider's network.
I understand. But, I mean, your entire network as a service provider, you're designing an NNI. It's not.
I'm just telling you, they're not letting those P headers leave their network, each service provider. That's how it works in the PowerPoint. So I mean, well, and I was going to say, I have some documentation elsewhere, so I can throw a, draft together.
Right. So you're telling me that it's illegal. Oh, that might be better for you. It's illegal for the P headers to leave the network. That might not be good for other of us. It's illegal for the P headers to leave your network, but it's not illegal for a passport that contains the literal values of those P headers to leave your network.
Correct.
That's madness. What are you saying?
Well, I'll tell you what, we can bring the draft in and discuss it then, right? But the intent was that they're taking those headers off, and partly because they're not standardized, right?
Yeah, but the
Well, but-
values in them are in your passports that leave your network. This is madness.
One second. So my assumption, my thought when you mentioned that was that it wouldn't be P headers. It would be sort of like info or those types of
Right.
things.
If you want to just
that
have a
you would add
parameter, that had exactly the same function as the LOA and as the
At least that would be the easiest way to define it. And
I mean, the point is
if we want
these
to
headers
include it.
exist, right? And I'm always kind of annoyed when these things exist and they aren't in the IETF, but at length verstat, that I'm still annoyed about. So I'd rather that the way these are being done be things that people are aware of outside of that community, and that they're in public specs. But
I mean, right now, at least in the IP NNI task force, the plan is probably not to use those. But if we think that there's a non-controversial way to define compact form, just to be complete and add them as identity header parameters.
I mean, I would do
okay with
identity parameters. That's fine. Yeah, that doesn't matter to me. This all started again from our conversations about the fact that
No,
passports were getting too
It's a
big.
valid point.
And like, if you want to reduce the size of them, we're talking about different ways we try to cut them down. The obvious way for this would be to do a compact form for Shaken. All you would need for that is for the two Shaken parameters to actually appear somewhere else in the SIP request, and then you'd be able to do it. And so if it's not the P headers who want to do as parameters, that's fine. It's just and I said this earlier before you came in, what I don't want to do is to prevent that, right, from being possible in the RFC that we put out, and then have to go fix it later.
And we would also want them to be optional. So if you're doing full form, you wouldn't require that. Yeah.
Correct, right.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't necessarily want that to be a dependency for this document, to have that all documented, right? Because you're going to have to put when you describe how to use the compact form, that you're going to need those headers there, right? But you need to define the normative behavior for those, right?
Yeah.
But
They're purely there to support compact form.
correct. No, they're not in the proposal, right? That wasn't the intent in the proposal at all.
No.
The intent in the proposal was to capture them as soon as they come into the service provider's network. So if it leaves their network, they build their passport then. So they're not signing as it hops to their network, because a large percentage of the calls.
I think you're conflating the P headers, which were just meant to be internal to the network. This is purely representing the ORIG ID and the attest parameter, so that if you're using compact form, you can
Okay, that's a
pass
different
it.
thing then.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he started with trying to suggest we use the P headers. So we're not going to, no, that's fine. No, that's fine. I'm okay with that. That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
We hadn't discussed that part, and I maybe just assumed that would be the solution, but
Okay, that's fine. I'm fine with that then, if we do that, yeah. Okay, and we do have editorial comments from Mr. Berger here that I have in my hand.
Oh.
So
There's,
I'll do those, yeah.
okay. So I think, so I can quickly add some text around that, and is that?
so would you please send a note to the list outlining what you're planning to add?
Yeah,
And
I
then
might even
maybe
be
add-
able to just write up the text and
Yeah.
create a new version.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think so.
So you need to put him into presenter mode over there.
Actually, if you, Tolga Asferen, yes, I mean, if you can drive the slides, I would appreciate it. Right. First, it would be about a few errata, which possibly may require, in my opinion, some changes in 8224 and 8225. And I already received some comments on those, particularly from John. And next slide, please. First, let's go over the first one. Right, the first one pertains to how IET is populated. Okay, now 7519, right, defines that IET needs to be populated with the time of passport issuance. Now, in my opinion, it is relatively clear, actually quite clear, what issuance time for a passport means. So currently, right, relying on date for that is, in my opinion, risky to say the least. And if one takes a very strict approach, a very purist approach, in my opinion, one may even argue that it's the wrong thing to do. Because, as said, I think issuance time is, well, the time when the passport was issued. Granted, if date is really close enough, and if you want to use compact form, you may rely on it. But rather than favoring use of date for populating IET heavily in 8224 and 8225, then I would have expected a more neutral language where using date is specified, indicated more as an option when certain conditions are met.
Tolga, this is John. You said it's risky. Can you help me understand what actually the risk is?
Sure. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, now let's consider this scenario. Right, UE is generating invite, and then, for example, you have an access entry point, right, to your network. and UE is populating the data header, right? And now, initially some announcement is played, some digits are collected from UE, etc. You are still in the originating network, right? And then there are cases, and this is really something we face in reality, where people want to generate signature only when the call is going to leave their network. Because the line of thought there is, if the call originates in my network and terminates in my network, then I probably don't need to sign it, verify it, because I trust myself, right? And why do I need to, pay the cost for signing and verification pretty much unnecessarily? So the signature is generated only if the call is leaving the originating network. And at that time, the difference between date and the actual time at which the passport is issued could be different in a non-negligible way. Now, one could argue then when you do that, just you can also update the date header. Well, that may be problematic for some other reasons, right? And may even not be allowed at certain network deployment models based on jurisdiction or based on some other factors.
Sure. No, and it's John again. I get that. And I did read your mail about this in the list. I guess I've got two comments about that. The first is I know we don't define what SPCs do because no one defines what SPCs do, but SPCs love to just recreate invites and like recreate things like dates. I think they would in these cases, and they would recreate passports in these cases. And I said, say more particularly that this is not what I would consider to be an example of ordinary PSTN operations that have 45, 50 seconds of post-style stuff. And that for that reason, I'm okay with that being the may case and the one that's in the documents now being the should case, because I expect that the should case is what you should do most of the time. If you're doing very unusual things like this, and I know these unusual things, they're all happening in the originating network, and that's a necessary part model here, right? Where the T1s and T2s and so on, all that stuff is being all controlled and tabulated. It's like I just, I'm unpersuaded that this would convince me not to just create this loose coherence between date that we have today, because the style of impersonation attacks that we're trying to defeat, these kinds of call flows just aren't things that I consider that significant to the threat model. Like what hacker is like using things like this, right? It's, I guess what I'm trying to figure out how you exploit this as a hacker to be able to impersonate someone that you couldn't otherwise. The only reason that this would lead us to, another impersonation opportunity would be because it encourages us to make our recommended date window larger, right? Which that does actually make things easier for hackers. So, I think just based on like the kind of the 80-20 argument, this is not the way most telephone calls occur. And I'm okay with what we have as a should being the way most telephone calls occur, and okay with there being a may for ways that sometimes things need to happen.
So actually, basically, then I believe you had another point in your comment on the list that you wanted that. The main reason why reliance on date was introduced for the sake of compact form. So how much practical value is there really saving on the time information itself? Is it considered as something, tangible or something something negligible compared with the total size of a message?
So, I guess that is the trade-off, compact form. We assume that we'd rather save bits than care about what is under ordinary operation, again, 99.9% of the time, very small difference. I guess if the difference is within what we expect, in our threat model is okay, kind of clock drift, right? and, you know, where we don't think that there's much likelihood of an impersonation attack being launched, like as a cut and paste attack, basically, in that time window, where we expect, for example, that the UAS and the terminating side would still remember facts about the calls it's seen and be able to correlate the fact that this is replay or things like that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's because of that we assume that date difference is insignificant. And I did ask some people that know stuff about JOTS about this a bit too, about how they interpreted IET, like how strictly we should understand it. And I did go back and look at 7519, and I really don't think it's, you know, that it really mandates much in connection with that. So,
Chris Went. I just want to reiterate, John, actually, Tolga brought it up, your comments on the list and sort of going back to the philosophy of correlating the date and the IET as sort of our primary replay attack mechanism. And I think, you know, even since in IPN and NI, we've been focusing a lot on full form and not necessarily correlating those things. It's good to go back and think about the fundamental reason why we did that. And for me, that sort of goes to the point of, you know, what did we want to represent the IET as? It's meant to be the date. We should keep it that way. If you do have these application scenarios that are holding up the invite in the network, then that's just part of the things you have to do when you're doing these types of applications. So personally, I would even tend to say, let's go back to the fundamental philosophy and sort of try to stick with that.
And then maybe one comment/question. What is the general feeling or opinion about making use of current time? The preferred form is full form is used rather than compact form.
This is John again, Tolga. I mean, it's a may in the document right now. It says that if you're using full form, I believe it says, well, if you're using full form, you must use the, or I guess if the IT is different, you must use full form. That's basically what it
Yes,
does, right?
yeah. But what about if you will turning it around and, okay, if you need to use the full form for some other reason, right, then would it be preferable to use the current time over date or not, right?
I mean, I think it doesn't, if it makes a difference, I think we have a real problem. If it makes a difference in terms of our threat model, then I think we have a problem. Then because it doesn't make a difference in terms of our threat model, we don't have a problem. So it's kind of, I don't care either way. If it's, 500 milliseconds later, it makes no difference to the way that the verification service should evaluate the passport. That's okay. I mean, remember, Tolga, too, we designed this for cases where, imagine this graph you've got up here now, and this is probably something I shouldn't have said on the list. Imagine like the things on the UE side, have a NAS built into them. They sign this. It goes to the first SBC. And the first SBC does basically acts as a B2B UA and puts a new date on it. And, if you did this full form at the start and you have a passport with an IET in it, the date's different from that because of something that an SBC did to change the date in the SIP message but preserved the original passport, it should still work, right? So we want to allow these things to be different because SIP stuff gets munged in the middle of the network. And so that's like one of the main reasons why we want these things to be able to be different.
I understand. Of course, if you change the date header, then you are supposed to generate a new passport. But I can again tell that in practice, SPCs evolved quite a bit. Now, I think most of them have the capability to pass date headers in an unmolested way. I mean, it is really not a given that an SPC or a device similar to that would definitely change the date header, just for general information for folks there.
Okay, Mary Barnes, I'm actually going to get up here and agree with Mr. Peterson. I don't think we have a problem, and I think it's better, let's get some operational experience and see if there's a real problem out there. We're sitting here saying we don't think there is, right? This is a theoretical problem.
Okay, the next one is about the fingerprint attribute. Currently, there is some text in IT 224 which ties its use to use of the TLS SRTP. Actually, there could be other reasons why it is needed. For example, TLS with self-signed certificates for MSRP is one use case. And probably there is also no good reason why its inclusion should be tied to some specific use case anyhow. So I would suggest that it is included whenever a fingerprint is present in SDP.
It's John again. So remind me, when you're doing, and Adam or somebody, you probably know this off the top of your head, when you're doing TLS with self-signed certs from SRP, would you have an A equals fingerprint attribute in SDP? You would, Ben?
Yes.
Are there alternatives, like where you would store it in another attribute parameter in SDP, or?
Not I am aware of.
Yeah, okay, probably. Yeah. Okay, I could probably see that. In terms of how we're going to fix that, I'm not sure I would have ratted that in 8224. I'd probably do something that if you wanted to have an MSRP usage for TLS with self-signed search for this, we'd do a separate specification that describes how you'd integrate that in with this. If I had to speculate, just organizationally how we do that. I don't know, there's like a burning interest in that at the moment.
No, I agree. There is no maybe a burning interest in it, but then for the approach you proposed, wouldn't that run into the risk of then whenever you need to use it for something else than the TLS SRTP, then you would need to come up with a new document?
It is, and I think I'm okay with that risk. Again, so you remember, if you get back to, remember our threat model here, what are we here to do? We're here to try to beat a class of impersonation attacks. They're largely based on telephone calls. They're largely based, and now I'm not going to say it has nothing to do with messaging. MSRP is a little different from the traditional text messaging cases, though, where you're doing numbering, impersonation based on telephone numbers, right? This is deeply tied to telephone numbers. It's deeply tied to the semantics of you're receiving, communication from a number and trying to figure out if it's being impersonated or not. I don't know that there are a lot of use cases for that, to be honest, out there in the world, and I'm not sure how likely it is that, like, Ben, what's the thing that you and Russ are working on with Martin Daly and all that, that is doing, isn't that like a messaging? Yeah. Like, what does that use for?
Not self-signed.
So it doesn't use self-signed certs, it doesn't use TLS, but is it MSRP or what does it use? I don't even remember. Oh, it's using S5. Okay. Okay. It's a transport neutral, right, messaging, secure messaging thing, but it is for roughly these kinds of use cases. So, I mean, I guess, again, I'm not, I think I'll certainly say this. We put out one spec that updated RFC 8224 to say, if you want to do A equals fingerprint for other applications, we're doing it for this, and if you need to do it for other ones, here's how you do it. What I would not want to do at this point, though, is speculatively, based on the fact there might be interest in doing something kind of like this, say actually A equals fingerprint is not tied to DTLS SRTP. I'd much rather say if there's a specific use case that we define what it is and put it out there and get consensus that that's actually something that we want to be able to capture and stir. At least that's my initial reaction to that.
Okay, then just wondering, why was that restriction or reliance to put there to start with?
So
because I don't know the history behind it.
So yeah, this comes back to, are you familiar with the SIP Brandy work? Have you heard of SIP Brandy? This is a working group we had here in the IETF. We're trying to figure out ways that we could use this to provide basically secure chain of confidentiality. We had a whole bunch of these. We had a BOF about this that I think was called like RTP-SEC or something like that, where we vetted a number of different solutions for doing secure, basically secure voice or secure real-time media in the IETF. And after a lot of experimentation, a lot of argumentation about things like ZRTP and things like that, we ended up obviously with DTLS SRTP as our standard for doing this here for most of the types of media that we're setting up here with SDP, and especially for the STIR-ish use cases. And so kind of we, you know, it was in consideration of the, again, STIR threat model, which is really based on mostly telephone calls coming in, and the need to make sure that we were providing adequate protections for this to be like a class of attacks where, and this is like Hadriel Kaplan, this is all coming back to me now. This is like back when like Hadriel Kaplan was here, and we were going to have something in the passport that was going to sign based on like an IP address or something like that. And Hadriel got really uptight about it and said that we were ignoring all of these best practices for like IP security. And so instead we wanted to tie this in a mandatory way to some cryptographic instrument that was going to be built into the device, basically to prevent attacks where like the SIP signaling is coming from a slightly adjacent module or device than where the media is coming from. And it was
I mean, yeah, I understand the need and completely agree for DTLS SRTP itself. I was asking more in the context of why the restriction of including MKA when not only when fingerprint is present, but also that it needs to be used for DTLS SRTP. I mean, what type of optimization is aimed for when generating the passport for that?
Yeah, I mean, forgive me, Robert, if I'm rambling and you want to interrupt me before I ramble more, you're welcome to do that.
Well, ramble just a little bit more, but
Okay.
try to keep it
I
short.
mean, again, like I said, it was just that RTP-SEC thing, right? It was, we had our kind of like Thunderdome for what the right way was to do this. And we decided the right way to do this for the use cases we cared about was DTLS SRTP. And there was a lot of people in a big room that talked about this for a long time. And all of our security smart people said this was the right thing to do. And so when we built STIR, it was built, and a lot of artifacts for how that came together, was built in a way that we wanted to create, again, that binding between the signaling layer and the media layer. And we felt that, that a mandatory strength requirement to the thing that had won in Thunderdome was required.
Ben Campbell, I don't usually have to pull the mic down. I just wanted to confirm that MSRP does require the use of the fingerprint attribute if one is using self-signed certificates. And actually, the definition of that comes from the Comedia over TLS stuff.
So John's reminder of the conversation that we had in group when we put this, the must that we're basically talking about here into the specifications was a well-considered and widely participated in decision by the group. So I think that puts this one pretty much to bed. I mean, this was the group came to the decision to do it this way. I think the possibly the only shortcoming that we might have in the documentation that's leading to us having to have this conversation is we didn't write down enough why at the time.
Well, and like I said, it's not crazy either to say there should be a way maybe to do this with MSRP. I mean, I you know, now that I think about it, I'm like, well, it's not like that's wrong or something. I don't think it was what we needed to beat our threat model, which is robocalling, because those robocalls are like really, really annoying and like they're not MSRP. But you know, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't object to having a document that said there should be another way to do this for a specific use case that some people are going to get behind, and that we really want to do this for something like MSRP. That would be fine.
and the properties get vetted as opposed to trying to just generically create an open
Yeah,
expansion
exactly.
point.
Rather than errating 8224
Yeah.
and saying, hey, anything
Yeah.
goes, whatever, when it equals
I'm
zero,
on that
man, go
page.
nuts. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
So to our area director, Adam. We just talked about 2 errata that are in the system. You officially have to process them. Do you want anything from the working group?
Probably not, but when I get the details, that might change.
Well, you're going to push one of 3 buttons, right? Okay.
I think with what you just said, we will assume you have all the information you need unless you say otherwise later.
Okay, great.
And I think that is the last slide here is that,
So we're moving to the P-charge info, right?
yep. Was that, or do we do, I think we had it on the agenda to do the
Oh, sorry. Right.
call flows first. All right, here's the tweak widget.
Okay. So I went ahead and started putting together some call flows, looking at some of those that we had done for history info and trying to show what it looks like when you've got the div passport and history info, just to kind of show how some of this information correlates. So just a little bit of background, right? So there is the optional HI element in the div passport, right? And that contains the index of the related history info header field when you did the retargeting. And so therefore, you can correlate it. And so you can get, for example, we have a reason field out there that might be helpful in some cases, right? Without having to add that, into the div passport. And then history info it captures the request URI, but we also tagged the type of retargeting. And that was something we added in the biz. That wasn't originally there. So RC is the target user remains the same, basically registered contact is what you're using. The MP is when the target user changes to an AOR that is totally unassociated with the AOR of the original target user. And then NP, there's no change in the request URI. Thing about history info, when we bizzed it, we do internal retargeting. We capture every bit of how that request is retargeted and how the request URI changes. Okay, and if you go look at the div passport, it's pretty much being added in the case where you're doing the MP, right? That AOR is changing. Okay, so I put together an example. So I've got over on the right the passport for the initial request. And then when you do the diversion, the div passport, what that looks like. And then I tried to just show how the history info, the information you're going to have. Now here you can see that the MP isn't actually the last HI entry, right? You're pointing to 121 because that's at the point in time when you actually retarget it to the new AOR. And so, but you still can go back and look at your MP attribute and know that, you had the div. You should expect, if you're implementing, secure identity, that you're going to have a div passport there. Krister?
Yeah, just a question of clarification. I haven't read this text in the draft, so I'm asking
Okay.
here. The only thing you're actually going to assign here is this index value, right? So it doesn't say any.
Correct. Correct.
So if someone goes and this doesn't say anything about whether the history info, that our information has been modified or compromised or whatever.
Well,
this doesn't really sign the history info
it
itself.
doesn't sign history info, but you do have some information, right? You have the original, target, AOR and the request UR and that sort of thing. So you'd want to make sure that's the same when it gets to the application. So it's giving the application a little bit more confidence that this stuff wasn't mucked with.
Is there text about that?
I just look in the draft. I don't remember now. It's pretty rough right now, but right. It's in right.
I think there's
Exactly.
actually in the div draft that says roughly in the sense of all we're protecting here is these HIs. I have no idea what they point to. And it's there to just help you sequence this, to understand
Right.
how the things that are in divs connect up with whatever's in HI. And presumably you
yeah.
could look at it and see shenanigans. I don't know. Right?
Yeah, well, you can, right. So and I have some text in there for the use cases, right? And I only got through one use case because this stuff is really tedious, and I had to add telephone numbers back in there, We had normal SIP URIs, so it was a little tedious, but I found it helpful myself because Marianne Mahaly is going to have to do this at some point in time because she does all the history info and diversion stuff over in 3GPP. So, Krister?
Yeah, and that's all fine. I just, wanted to be clear that this is
Correct.
not a method for signing the whole history info.
Correct, absolutely correct. And this is the whole thing. Let me go to the next one. I think I get into discussion points, right? So history info, again, captures the new target when the entry is added. And it has the same value as the request URL and the request. We capture the new one, so it's there for when you do retargeting, just to refresh people. And so then the div passport is added when the request has been retargeted and the destination AOR changes. So they're not quite like I showed in the example, right? You've got index 121, but really the mapping happened one step further. But the fact that you have an MP in there, then you should have a corresponding div if you're doing end-to-end authenticated identity. Okay, and so this is my point here. Is there value in adding more information to the passport? For example, the reason, right? Some of the applications base what they do based upon the reason header field. That's in the history info, right? So I was going through the use cases and just trying to see if it would be helpful in terms of the confidence in the information that you have in the history info to put something else in there. And this is just a thought. I just started doing this, so. Okay, and then I was going to go ahead and do some more use cases. And the second one, actually, and this is what I realized, so there's a voicemail scam where they call in and they guess the password, and then they kind of hijack the account because they record a new greeting and they have the words to use in terms of accepting collect calls and stuff. And so then they hijack your PBX and start transferring and making outgoing calls and stuff. So that's a real one that is going on. But see, it turns out it's not, history info doesn't really, to me, this is just the thing that STIR in general helps with, right? Although, for example, you could block the calls. You have more information now, the calls coming in, right? So if it comes in with a gateway attestation, you might well not want to even let that get to the voicemail system. Yeah.
But to Krister's point, the gateway attestation is not what's protected by the passport, right?
It would be, this would be in your passport, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean the attestation you're shaken? No, sorry.
Correct, the shaken
I thought you meant-
attestation.
okay,
Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess I should have been more clear there, right? That's right. This is our shaken passport. This is in the case you'd have that, yeah. Okay, and so my question is there value in doing more call flows and stuff? I thought it was helpful because we really don't, in general, have a lot of call flows for any of the STIR stuff. And I think once we put, diversion in there, I think it's helpful personally. But if I'm the only one, no one's going to read it and find it helpful and informative, then I obviously will not continue working on it. Any feedback on that? Nope.
I support the work.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea to document. Obviously, we've doing a little bit of that on the IP&I side as well, and these issues do got complex, so I definitely think there's value.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, Chris, I think as we are defining this this thing, we should have examples, whether it's in the same document or separate documents. I don't really care, but
Okay,
I think
right.
it's good to have examples.
Okay, right. And I personally prefer separate call flow documents personally, but anyways, okay. And if anybody wants to help me do this sort of thing, that would be good, right? Especially if anybody has prototypes and real flows, that's always very helpful, so.
Chris, I just had another comment because you had a question there whether we should also include the reason in the passport. I think because this could go down a slippery slope, then someone wants to add something else. So I think if you want actually information from the history info, we should just define a compact way of doing it. These are the elements that you take from the reason header, and then you calculate it and put the value into the passport instead of.
Exactly, I know, and I have a little bit of discussion about that in the document on what's the better way. And maybe it's worth just considering still, right? Again, once we work through some use cases, we might see, right, if the other information really is important and has an impact on, the end service where this might be used, then yeah. Okay.
So while there's support for continuing working on the call flow documents, do you have a good feel for when it would be fine to submit this thing for publication? And if other reasons came up to make call flows put in a separate document? I don't want this to be forever frog boiling exercise.
Sure. I mean, my plan was to go through the history info call flows and pick some of those out, right? Because we figured we had a, fairly diverse range work through those, and then specifically some of the ones that we're kind of tussling with over in IPNNI. So, I mean, I can try and have something much more complete, you know, for the next meeting, target that, and then we can see how people feel about it, right? Do they think it's sufficient, you know, provides enough information? And again, just to convince myself of whether or not we want to do some of these other things, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you stupid machine. You see what I just did? No. I closed the tab that had the next presentation in it. And
Undo.
and now it's in a place that I have no idea what it did. I mean, how do I get back to where I had my tabs? I didn't close the whole thing of tabs. Thank you very much. All right, so we will attempt to reopen the P-Charge info slides. And that's going to do the very wrong thing. Nope, go away. We don't want that. We're going here. And we're going here. And we do that and that. I don't think this thing has saved us time. Maybe after, you know, some training, but. So Togo, I assume you're still there?
Yes, Tolga Asveran. So basically, I submitted this draft because P-Charge info is used in practice, and especially also when steer is used mainly in shaking context, and it contains sensitive information because it pertains to billing. And I would like to hear whether people would have interest in me continuing this work. So that's the reason why I submitted it. And I received some comments from Krister, and thank you very much for them. So if there is interest, and then I will submit a new version with some improvements based on feedback and other missing pieces. So next slide, please. So P-Charge info, right? I mean, first let's go over it. It's in use for 10 plus years globally, and it conveys information about the party to be built, right? And it is about to be an informational RFC. It's currently in the last call, and I guess for another about 3 weeks or so. And as said, that still P-Charge info is just to provide some verification on this sensitive piece of information. That's the main idea behind it. And as said, if there is interest, then I will continue working on it, and I will submit a new version.
Chris Went. I guess maybe I had two questions. One is, you know, Passport is really based on origination, destination things. I'm not a P-Charge info expert, but I thought that was something that was more on one side in a trusted domain. I get the idea of maybe signing charge info because you don't want it to change or something like that, but I'm a little curious if Passport's the appropriate mechanism for doing that, or, you know, I don't have strong feelings about that, but I just wanted to bring that up as a potential issue here.
Chris, go ahead.
Yes, Kirsten, I think I had a question on where actually this was going to be used. I don't think I ever got an answer to this because I think this is just used between trusted nodes. I think that's what the draft even says. So I had a question about that, and unless I missed it, I haven't received an answer. But then I think it's procedure-wise, I'm a little worried about this because what is also said here, that this is an informational draft. The purpose is to describe something which has been deployed and so on. So what about if someone comes and say, yeah, I want to do a passport for the diversion header? Are we going to do that too? And my last comment related to that is that since this is an informational draft, would we do a standard stack draft for the passport? I mean, those things can be solved out, but I think my technical question is really why is this needed? Because it's used within a trusted environment, and so why do you need it?
Yeah, I think the notion of trusted environment, it's probably not 100% black and white. So there are really different shades in between, and but again, I understand. I understand the concern and the point. Just this is as said. I mean, I am not sure whether trusted, untrusted is really an on-off definition.
John Peterson. How long have I waited to hear those words? Mark Watson, what would it have been when 3224 was done? 1999, something like that. When we talked about spec Ts and trust domains and the scope of P headers and how they got removed and all the assurances we got about how black and white they were and it would never leak, and of course it always did. But that doesn't mean that it's on us to define standards that make up for a problem that we can't solve and legitimize something that we know is broken. That's basically what you're telling me. So, I mean, if you're asking us to create something with a force of a document that we could have consensus around something we know is broken this way, that we couldn't get consensus on any of the other documents listed up here on York's thing, and, then, I mean, why would you even imagine when we do this and start?
Hi, Sean Turner. This is a pretty minor comment. I just skimmed the draft really quickly. PCI is also an acronym used in another space that's fairly well known. And so I know this is P-Charge info, but there's this payment card industry thing. There might be some confusion. So I don't know, maybe pick a different name. But like I said, it's minor.
All right, so my initial sense of the feel of the room is that there's not a lot of enthusiasm for taking this on and pushing it further. And in fact, a few small but non-insignificant reasons not to. So am I characterizing that correctly? Is anybody in the room disagree with that characterization? Okay, Toga, do you understand what I just said?
Sure. And if in the future, if somebody suddenly has a change in opinion, just they can express it on the list. But until then, I assume there is no sufficient interest and need to progress this further.
All right. I think that was the last thing we had. So do you have any wrap-up items? I've got one. I'd like to get a feel for the folks that are here, whether or not they think we actually need to meet in, we're going to be in Bangkok next. So it feels to me that we're in a tail mode, and with the possible exception of some conversation on the history info call flows drafts, I'm having a hard time imagining what we would actually need to talk about in person.
Sure, and this is just irrespective of whether or not we want to meet in Bangkok. That's something we can figure out here. But I mean, the two things other than that I think we still kind of need to work on. One of them is actually the certs stuff, the short-lived certs stuff, which as we've been ramping up in Acme and figuring out what the right architecture for that is. And I think we are reaching a point of coordination between like Acme Star and what we want to do for our cases, where it might actually be possible to take that document we have that's kind of parked now and say, here's what should go in it. I wouldn't say that's super pressing, but it would be kind of it would be the STIR document that kind of organizes all that Acme work into something that, explains kind of what the interplay is here. It's probably worth doing that. Like I said, I wouldn't say it's super urgent. The other thing that I'm kind of interested in is the connected identity stuff that Chris and I batted around last time, but did not have time to do anything for this time. But, if we get motivated and there's a fire and just try to fix that, it's something that I keep hearing out in the world that people want it these days. But that's highly dependent on basically the usual suspects doing work,
Right.
That sometimes doesn't get done.
Sounds like a half hour.
Okay. So what we just muttered up here is it sounds like we should request a meeting, but it should be short.
But just clear, yeah, I do think we're in a point now where we've got enough of the core specification out there. There's a lot of deployment and implementation interest in this. Let's take a look, right, and see what people do with this. And, like div, there are going to be things that rise quickly, I imagine, that need to get done. And so,
Something surfaces, sure.
yeah. But, the good news is that, yeah, I think we're over the hump on this, definitely.
Any other business? I think we're done. Thank you very much for your time today.
I'll take care of the blue sheets.
Thank you.